Today I want to talk about the 5 top reasons of why people can't afford to pay their bills today, because clearly this is a kind of new phenomenon where you have more and more people falling behind and in higher debt than ever before. We've always had people that were irresponsible with money or couldn't pay bills because of one reason or another, but it seems like a lot more people are falling into this these days than ever before. So I think it's important to examine why. And some of it can be prevented and some of it just can't be because of this current state of the economy. Knowing the things that you can do and the things that you can change can give you an advantage and help you out if you're somebody who is having a hard time paying their bills. So the first thing is something that affects all of us and none of us are immune to, and that is the stubborn high prices and the high inflation that we have all experienced over the past 5 years. The problem is the inflation numbers are still nowhere near the Fed's target. The most recent reading in December of 2024 was 2.9%. If anybody remembers, their goal was supposed to be 2%. So they are still very far away from that. And on top of it, we know that the federal government's numbers and the Fed's numbers that they use to gauge inflation are definitely not in line with what most people actually experience. So the real inflation for most people is quite a bit higher than what the actual number is. And here's the big problem with inflation, guys. Once we see prices go up, they rarely, if ever, come back down. That is the biggest issue. You know, it was basically painted the picture and was promised and made it look like that this inflation that we experienced during the pandemic would be temporary. And a lot of people interpreted, the Fed trying to fight inflation and interest rates coming down as if that was actually going to fix the problem, that somehow we're going to get out of this and prices are going to come back down, which is actually false. Because even though the actual inflation figures have started to decline, the prices have not. People always confuse that. They think that inflation equals high prices, but they also think that inflation coming down means prices coming down, which is not true. The only way that would be true is if we had negative year-over-year digits of inflation, which would actually be deflation. But that's not what we see. Just because the official inflation numbers aren't at 9% anymore doesn't mean prices on everything aren't still going up. It just means that the prices are not going up as fast as they once were. We can just take a few household staples with groceries to give you a perfect example of just how much prices have gone up and have not recovered, okay? Right before the pandemic, eggs were on average about $1.48 a dozen. As of December 2024, a dozen eggs is a whopping $4.15, guys. About 3 times more expensive than it was pre-pandemic. Butter went from $3.53 to $4.73. A chicken breast went from $3.29 to $4.10. And that one might not seem like a lot, but when you add up all of those things at the cash register at the grocery store, suddenly your grocery bill is $100, $200 higher than it was 4 years ago. Which kind of leads me right into my next point, which is spending and wages. This is the second reason why a lot of people can't afford to pay their bills anymore. Because one thing that was bragged about during these past few years when inflation was on fire is they say, oh, look, the wages are still beating inflation, so if everything's still great, the economy is on fire, all looks well in the world because the wages are outpacing inflation, which is not actually true because they don't take into consideration taxes that people have to pay. They're looking at people's gross income, not their net income, when they're looking at wages. And everybody's individual inflation rate is likely much higher than this stupid 2.9% that they're saying it is. But here's the thing, during the pandemic, what happened was you had a lot of people that saw a raise out of necessity. People needed to get a raise due to the cost of living started to go up. We really started to see inflation peak in 2022, and even before then it was already on the rise substantially. And of course the Fed failed to do anything about it until it was way too late, which is pretty typical. But what happened was people started seeing all this extra money coming in, and inflation wasn't really fully felt like it is now, and interest rates for everything were super low, so people started spending like it was never going to slow down. People started borrowing, people got into all kinds of debt, thinking, oh, look how low the rates are, I can borrow as much as I want. Oh, I'm making all this extra money, I can do whatever I want. Let's buy a bigger house. Let's buy a new car. Let's take on more debt. You know, basically, I'm making more, so I'm going to spend more. But then what happened was reality kicked in, because inflation is kind of a lagging thing. It takes time for it to permeate throughout the economy, and people kind of got blindsided by just how expensive everything got within a relatively short period of time. So a lot of people kind of overextended themselves buying that new house or buying that new car or taking on that extra loan or home equity loan or credit card debt, whatever. And now that the real price of everything is here and interest rates are quite a bit higher than they were a few years ago, people are feeling the crunch. You know, people are feeling the pinch. They didn't really plan to be squeezed financially like this, which is very stupid. You know, I'm not going to say it any other way, guys. It really is. You know, anybody who thought that this whole situation we had during the pandemic was just going to last forever is really a fool's errand. You know, people really bought into that, thinking that, oh, look, these rates are just going to stay low forever and I'm just going to have all this extra money and we're all just going to be rich and happy. No. And then obviously when people get themselves into this really precarious financial position, naturally it makes it pretty hard to pay your bills. Now the third thing is high housing costs. And this is obviously another thing that we can't really do much about, but it was fueled by this irresponsible money printing and spending that we saw during the pandemic. Right now, the median home price across America is about $420,000, but pre-pandemic, it was about $315,000, $330,000, depending on which numbers you look at. And then, of course, we've seen rental costs go up by about 26, 28% over this same time frame. And there's not really much you can do about that besides make more money. But instead of everybody going out and taking on more debt and buying more expensive stuff and, you know, basically getting in over their heads financially, people should have saved some of that extra money they were making so they can afford that more expensive house now. So it's easier to pay that higher rent now rather than going into this massive amount of debt that so many people decided to take on. And I know it's easy to sit here and say should have, would have, could have. A lot of people didn't do it, so now what, Michael? All you can really do is learn from your past mistakes and try to do better in the future. There's not really much else you can do, which is why it's much better to never make these mistakes to begin with and learn from other people's mistakes, which is my favorite philosophy and way of living life. But this number 4 reason is one of the top reasons why people can't pay their bills right now, and is actually proof that they can't pay their bills, and that is the massive amount of credit card debt that we are seeing in this country, okay? Just as of the third quarter reading, which we haven't even seen the fourth quarter reading of 2024 yet, credit card debt was at 1.17 trillion. And I'm sure pretty much any day now, within the next few weeks, we're gonna get the fourth quarter numbers, and I guarantee you it's gonna be higher than that because the credit card debt is exploding, guys. When you take a look at this graph, you can see just how much it has been rising over the past few years. And what's gonna slow it down? Tell me. People are going to all of a sudden come into all this money and just start paying these bills off? Probably not. In fact, part of the reason that those credit card bills are so high and the debt is so high is because people can't pay their bills. So it's a very vicious cycle. We have more than 40% of Americans right now relying on credit cards to make monthly payments on something and buy things, you know, in order to basically pay for their basic living expenses. And you have credit card interest rates sitting at around 25-30% depending on the card, and you're making the minimum payment, or even if you're making more than the minimum, it's hard to get out of that because your remaining balance is being calculated at that 25 or 30% rate each month. Anybody who's ever been in credit card debt knows what I'm talking about and knows how hard it is to get out. Even if you're making a diligent effort to get out, it is not easy, guys. You guys can see it's kind of chilly here today. We don't have any snow in Miami, but man, 8 inches of snow up in the panhandle of Florida, that is pretty crazy. I've never done a snow video. I kind of wish we did get some snow here so I could be walking through the snow in some winter gear for you guys. Maybe one of these days I'll have a snow video for you. Now the 5th reason that people are having a hard time paying their bills is the lower savings rate. You know, everything is costing more, which means people are saving less money. So when an emergency does come up or something happens that you need money for unexpectedly, there's a good chance you might not have it. In fact, since 2019, the average household savings account balance has plummeted 32.5%, guys. Think about that number for a minute. 32.5% decrease over the past 6 years of people's balance in the savings account. So not only have we experienced a tremendous amount of inflation during the same time frame, but also people have far less money saved up than they did prior, which is the recipe for financial disaster. That's why you're seeing so many people fall on hard times right now. So imagine if you're somebody, being plagued by all 5 of these things, because 2 out of the 5 we all have to deal with. It's not a choice. Everybody has to deal with the higher cost of everything. Everybody has to deal with higher housing costs. But how responsible financially you were prior to these situations happening can make all the difference of how easy it is to handle this stuff. And I'm not saying that everybody that can't pay their bills right now was irresponsible financially during the pandemic and just did all the wrong things. Some people just don't make enough money to keep up with the cost of living today, and that keeps them poor and in this cycle. But if you're dealing with all 5 of these things, the other things are in your control. How much credit card debt you have, or how much you spent during the pandemic, how much debt you took on, how much of your income you choose to save and invest each month. Those are all personal conscious choices that people have. So I think it's important to also go over in this video some of the things that people could be doing better to make sure they don't fall into this trap, or if you're in it now, this might be a way to possibly get out. That's one thing I want to try to do better this year and improve my videos, is that, a lot of people have told me in the past, well, Michael, you bring up all these problems, what's the solution? So I'm doing my best that when I feel like there are solutions, to bring them up in the video along with the problems, so you guys can come full circle and not only hear the things that are happening, but how to prevent them from happening to you. Now, prior generations did not have nearly as much debt as people today have, and were not nearly as irresponsible financially. A lot of people saved cash for everything that they bought, and if they couldn't pay cash for something, they just didn't buy it. That was kind of the rule of thumb for a lot of the older generations, and a lot of people in older generations still live like that today. And that might sound kind of boring, especially since you can't have everything right now, but guess what? They're not broke and drowning in debt either. So one thing that a lot of people used to do a lot more effectively than they do today, or a lot of people just don't do it at all, is coming up with a budget and being realistic with how much they can spend each month without going broke. And a lot of people misunderstand budgeting, and they think, well, it means I'm going to have to deprive myself, I'm not going to have things in life. But really what it means is you're making your money work for you. You are planning accordingly with the income you have to give yourself a sufficient life. And once you actually track where all of your money is going, it allows you to make more efficient and smarter financial decisions, and ultimately not fall into a lot of the traps that we just talked about. See, the thing is too, if you go back 50, 60 years ago, before people had access to credit cards, they had to budget. They had no choice. It wasn't possible to just put everything on the credit card and worry about it later. Oh, I maxed this one out, let me just get another one. That didn't exist. So people needed to make their money work for them and last longer and make the dollar stretch further. It wasn't a choice, it's just something you had to do. But today people get to kind of opt out of that in favor of having more debt and just take the, well, I'll worry about it later approach. So that leads right into the next thing that a lot of people in previous generations had to do, similar to budgeting. Then this is a form of budgeting, which is saving a portion of your income each month and not spending everything you make, putting money away for a rainy day, so to speak. When you hear those financial gurus say things like, oh, you should pay yourself first, that's what saving and investing is. That's putting aside a chunk of your income that automatically goes towards your financial safety net, that goes towards your future before any other bills. And then you're supposed to be able to pay the rest of your bills with whatever is left over. And if you can't, then you are technically living beyond your means. And a lot of people don't realize this, especially if they don't have any savings, but the more money you save, the easier it is to save. because you have something called compound interest. This works with a high yield savings account. It works when you're investing in the stock market, really anything that gives you a return on your money. And so as you continue to save, you are now earning interest. You are earning a return on investment on a higher and higher balance each and every month. So it not only makes saving fun, it becomes like a game. It's like, hey, look, I see my balance going up. Look, I earned $100 in interest this month. Next month, maybe I'll earn $120. You know, it gives you like that boost, that incentive to keep putting the money away. And guess what? If you have that safety net, if you have that savings, you can pretty much avoid all of the things we just talked about in the previous segment where people fall into this trap where they can't pay their bills. Oh, your rent went up? No problem. I can cover that with the savings. Oh, the grocery bill went up? No problem. I have extra money saved. Oh, the car broke down? I have money saved. You get the idea?
So here we have a house for rent for $6,500 a month that has been listed since the beginning of October 2024 with nobody interested. In fact, look here on Zillow, only one contact this whole time. Literally nobody cares about this house, but I pulled up the actual MLS data since Zillow doesn't like to show what properties are renting for, and the last time this house actually rented was in July of 2021 for $5,200 a month. So they tried getting $7,900. Now they're down to $6,500. I think the owner of this house is in for a rude awakening, and they are going to be forced to lower this price very close to that 2019 number, if not actually below it, given the state of the market here in Miami.
Now, unfortunately, that is not something you can do anything about when it comes to trying to find a place to live or the higher cost of living, guys. People like that are just going to have the place sit empty long enough until they get desperate enough to actually lower it to the real price. And as a tenant, that's basically like a place that's not even on the market, even though it's technically available for rent. Now, here's the other thing that people did before and people are still doing in order to help them when they get into too much debt, okay? Or they start experiencing financial trouble. You know, people get realistic with, okay, look, I know I'm spending too much money. I see my balances going up on everything. I need to take a look at how much I owe, drastically cut back on my non-essential spending, and start paying down this debt, rather than continue down that road and just continue making the problems worse for yourself. But the thing is, debt has become so normalized in today's society. It just seems like, yeah, whatever. I have, $6,000 in credit card debt. No big deal. People don't even give it a second thought anymore. It's just looked at as normal. Or yeah, my car payment is $800 a month. That's normal now. Well, it's not normal. It's never really been normal up until recently. And the only reason it is normal is because of how irresponsible people have been. And I'm not going to deny this. The lenders, they make it easy to borrow for everything, guys. You can borrow against your home if you have any sort of equity. You can borrow to go to college. You can borrow to buy a new iPhone. You can borrow to buy groceries if you want. You can do buy now, pay later for groceries. You can pretty much borrow to buy anything now in multiple different ways. You can use multiple different forms of debt to borrow for the same thing if you want to. So the amount of leverage and the amount of credit people have access to is pretty much unprecedented, and it's not a huge shocker that people have been quite irresponsible with it. But you need to start paying this debt off. You need to cut back on your spending. You need to make sure, little by little, you are digging yourself out of the hole and not digging a deeper hole for yourself, because this is only going to hurt you in the future for a multitude of different reasons. Whenever you need to actually borrow for something important, or maybe you want to have a shot at retiring one day. Another big emergency comes up that you weren't expecting, and now you have to go deeper into debt for. You don't want that. The big problem that most people have today is they are breaking the rules of money. They're breaking the rules of finances, because even though we have cryptocurrency now, we have all different forms of credit that we never used to have 50, 60 years ago. We have ways to get things that we want right now. Just because all that stuff is available doesn't mean that you should use it. And if you do use it, you still need to stick with those basic money principles like we just talked about: spending less than you make, putting money away each month, saving and investing for your future, making sure you're not taking on debt, getting out of any debt that you do have. Just doing that, regardless of what type of financial products are out there and available to you, you will eventually succeed. The problem is a lot of people don't have the willpower to follow through with it. They cave in because they want something they can't wait for, or some people don't want to work harder to actually earn the things that they want. They'd rather just take on the debt and not even worry about it until it becomes a huge problem. But a lot of people now are having to face the music because reality is really setting in, not only with expenses and how much things cost, but with layoffs, guys. We've talked about so many different companies that have been firing people, and the biggest announcements recently were Starbucks and CNN. They are laying off people. Funny that Starbucks is now going to be performing layoffs, and they said it's going to be an unspecified amount of its corporate staff as they restructure the company. And this is all coming at a time when Starbucks is also saying you can't come in and hang out unless you buy a coffee, you can't use the bathroom, nothing. They are just completely whipping Starbucks into a new cup of coffee right now. Sounds like they're completely overbloated too, because they say that their size and structure slows them down with too many layers of managers and small teams. And basically you have probably a lot of too many middlemen and too many redundant positions that Starbucks doesn't need. So they're going to be getting rid of a lot of people. And they say that they're not actually going to be getting rid of any of their barista staff. There's anybody who works in the stores aren't going to be affected by these layoffs. But if you work for corporate Starbucks, you better watch out for your name being called. CNN, they announced that they're laying off 6% of their workforce, which results in about 200 jobs being lost, which is kind of a small layoff compared to some of these other large ones that we've seen from Amazon and Tesla and Apple and Google, all these other companies that have literally laid off thousands and thousands of employees over the past year. But basically what it comes down to is a lot of people aren't watching CNN anymore. You know, they claim that they're going to be investing $70 million. That's going to ultimately create a lot of new jobs for CNN because they're going to be changing their format. They're going to be making it easier to watch CNN from all different sorts of places, probably on your tablet, your phone, whatever. But the reality is CNN is struggling in the ratings department, and they have been for years. And they finished 2024 with the smallest audience in the network's history. And that goes among their daily viewers and especially among the most targeted advertising demographic of ages 25 to 54. So this is why CNN is dying, because people aren't watching the channel anymore. And I wonder why. I'm not even going to say anything else about that. I'm sure people can come to their own conclusions on why that is. But this ties in with the point I was making earlier, because the last thing you want to happen is you get laid off, you have your job like that, and you don't have an emergency fund, you don't have savings, you don't have anything invested, you have credit card debt, you're living beyond your means with your house payment. How long can you really last for in a situation like that, guys? You can't. So I hope that everybody sees this video, is smarter with their finances moving forward, even if it just helped you a little bit, or you know somebody it could help. Please make sure you share this video with them. And if you enjoyed it, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.